Hi guys, welcome to another weekly update. Plenty of things to talk about this week. So first of all, before I get into it, some kind of breaking news and not specific to development, but I wanted to call it out because if you have a Skype for Business environment, so Skype for Business online, definitely, on-prem probably not, but listen anyway, and you have any Skype for Business phones, so certified IP phones, you will want to stop everything you're doing, pause this podcast, and go and look at the top link in the notes where it says that Microsoft are changing the authentication mechanism for phones effective immediately. It says effective immediately and then says you've got until July the 1st, so I would go and read the blog post in full to fully understand it. They're moving to OAuth 2, which is a good idea, but it requires that a tenant admin needs to go and say yes to a bunch more permissions in your AD environment, so your Azure AD environment. So definite actions need to be taken if you want to keep those Skype for Business phones to keep working. So just want to call that out. It's kind of an evolving story as I record this because it only broke last night. We're still trying to get some clarification on whether it's on-premise or whether it's just online, whether it's one application that needs authorizing for all phone providers or whether each provider has its own authentication mechanism or steps that you need to walk through. So still trying to figure all that stuff out because this is kind of fairly early news. I will put a link to Tom Arbuthnot's blog post as well because he has written up nicely and he's got a good FAQ as well. So look out for all of that. And so I know it's not specific to development, but just go and find your local IT guy in your org and just make sure they're aware of this because you don't want to hit a situation on July 1st where all your phones stop working. All right, so actual development news. So a blog post I put out yesterday about web app bots and using the local Bot Framework Emulator. So if you've been to any talks that I do, you'll have noticed that I use the Bot Framework Emulator. I think it's a really good tool, but I kind of show it and I don't go into a lot of detail about how to set it up because there isn't really time in the talk. So I've had a couple of questions about it. So what I've done is written up a blog post specifically, so you can go and sort of look at that and step through. There's loads of screenshots and some video as well. So everything you need if you've never used the Bot Framework Emulator before. It's a really useful tool when you're looking, either taking the samples and getting started, or you already know what you're doing and you're just adding more features. It's always good to check locally, have that local debug. It's not as involved a setup as something like ngrok. It's not as powerful either, but oftentimes it doesn't need to be. So go and have a look at that if that sounds useful. Okay, so what else? A blog post on the Microsoft blog, the Microsoft 365 blog, around the value of collaboration in Microsoft Teams. So it's kind of interesting. So Microsoft looks like they commissioned a study from Forrester Consulting, and these things are always useful because they kind of help bring up some stats, bring up some information, bring up a load of quotes, and all that stuff is kind of very useful for us in kind of understanding whether or not, all the things that Microsoft say are true, definitely are true. I don't mean that in like a nasty way. It just helps to have some numbers sometimes to take to decision makers, and it's hard. There's lots of different people you could use. Microsoft are just one provider of collaboration software, so it's good to understand how these things stack up against each other. So some really good soundbitey quotes. So 4 hours a week saved by information workers through improved collaboration and information sharing. That's kind of a useful stat to have. If you're kicking off a collaboration project, you're trying to make your organization work smarter and work better, just having that information. What does 4 hours a week mean for every information worker? What does that relate to? Does it relate to cost savings? Does it relate to more productivity? 150 trips, the average number of overnight trips that are replaced with online meetings by year 3. That's a definite cost saving right there. So there's a number of these useful stats and bits of information that you can use in whatever way you want. If you're making the business case for moving to greater collaboration, getting people onto Teams, having more applications in Teams, all these stats are kind of very, very useful in kind of driving home that message. So that's kind of good to see. I'll put a link to that blog post because it's worth looking at for kind of tons of useful kind of stats. And then finally, kind of good news around PowerShell. So the Teams PowerShell module, which has been around for a while, but it's kind of been in beta, and it's now GA. So that's kind of good. It's like a v1.0, and it aligns to the 1.0 Graph API calls. So if you know anything about Graph, you'll know there's 1.0 Graph calls and there's also beta Graph calls. So what the team are doing is they're saying the 1.0 version of the PowerShell modules aligns to the 1.0 of the Graph API modules. And so because of that, and that gives you a flavour for the types of things that you'll be able to do in the PowerShell, right? So it's things like retrieving teams, getting all the channels in the team, getting a list of users in the team, provisioning a new team, adding new channels to the team, adding owners to the team, deleting teams, deleting channels, removing owners, updating properties and updating channel information. So a load of stuff you can do now in PowerShell with fully supported, fully GA PowerShell commandlets, all of which have documentation behind them, with standard kind of PowerShell documentation. There's been a couple of changes as well to the some existing GA commandlets. So on the Connect Microsoft Teams, you can now use Teams Gov Edition, which is useful, obviously, for you government people. And then in Get Team, there are more filters and there's more selection criteria as well. So you've got a ton more options about this. You can look at archive teams, you can look at invisible teams. Yeah, a ton of changes, and there's some commandlets that have just quite a few commandlets I think have actually just been rolled into kind of some of the the smaller ones have been rolled into some bigger ones. So all the details in the blog post, I would point you at that rather than me trying to read it out. Kind of makes more sense, and you can get all the information you need from that blog post. All right, that's everything I want to talk about this week. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll talk to you again next time.